Thank you. What you didn't mention was it's hard to give this talk because it's supposed to be advice, and I don't know anything more than you do. So, yeah, I'll just go forward with that. I mentioned a little bit about what I do. I just want to acknowledge, even though this isn't a research talk, I thought Lana might be here. So I thought I should put NIDCD on, and even though I finished up my ASHA Foundation grant, I knew Nancy would be here, so I wanted that there. And these are all the people in my lab at the moment, and they're the reason that I have time to write all the grants that I don't get. So I'm just going to give you a little background on who I am, where I'm coming from, and sort of why I've made some of the decisions I've been making. So I did my PhD in Boston, which is where I am now. I do like it there. And I was in a speech and hearing biosciences and technology program. And that was a program originally designed for teaching engineers to be speech and hearing scientists. It worked pretty well. I decided to stay. And I worked at the MGH Voice Center. 4 out of my 5 years as a doctoral student, I was funded on a T32. And I had no idea what writing a grant meant. I wrote a dissertation proposal, which I'm sure you all agree is nothing like a real grant. And no one ever told me I should write an F31 because we had 4 years of funding, and I was in a funded lab, and they only had to fund me for 1 year. Why would I waste my time writing a grant? Honestly, I know that sounds ridiculous to the people in this room, but it never occurred to me, ever. I thought about it a little bit about a year before I finished because I was looking for a postdoc. And some people asked me if I had grant writing experience. And I'm like, yeah, I read some grants. They were great. And lucky for me, I found a position at the University of Washington. I was actually on a T32, again, in their rehabilitation medicine department. And I was working with an advisor in a neurobotics laboratory, which was in computer science. And lucky for me, I was on a T32, and she was also very well funded from NSF and NIH. And she's like, don't waste your time writing a grant. So, as I started applying for jobs, I began to realize exactly how much trouble I was in. Because I would do phone interviews, and I would go to jobs, and they're like, yeah, your publications look great. So you've been applying for grants, right? You just haven't been funded yet. And I'm like, okay. And then I was lucky enough to get a job at BU because they didn't know any better, I suppose. And so the whole summer before I was going to start, I had finally gotten the memo that I was in big trouble. And I started writing grants like it was my job, which, as it turns out, it is my job to write grants. So I started my first year on Tenure Track, and in the fall I taught my first course. I'm mentioning that because I was on T32s, I never had to teach. So I taught my first course the fall of my first year, and for those of you who are yet to negotiate your first year on the tenure track, many times they will let you negotiate a semester off, and some brilliant person had given me the advice that I should ask for that semester off to be the spring of my first year. Do that. That is an excellent idea. So I taught right away, and even though I was terrible and didn't know anything about teaching, it gave me time for everything to arrive in my lab and to train the undergrads. That's the big thing here. I was training new undergrads. That was really easy for me because even though I wasn't writing grants, I was doing something during my postdoc. And that was mentoring about 7 undergrads. My advisor left to go work for Google while I was a postdoc and left me in charge of her lab, which was interesting because it was a robotics lab, and I was trying to learn robotics, not mentor her 7 doctoral students and all of the undergrads that she had said I could hire, which was very useful. It gave me this experience. So when I started my new lab, I didn't have any doctoral students. I didn't have any support, but I had a bunch of free undergrads, and I knew how to tell them how to do something. I got my ASHA Foundation New Investigators Grant that year, which was awesome. It's the reason I was allowed to come to Lessons for Success my first year. And I also submitted my R03, which was based on work that I had done as a doc student and also as a postdoc. And I think that helped it made my R03 look a little more legitimate. Someone mentioned, will they believe I can do this? And I think, in my case, at least I think, a reason they thought I could was because all the publications weren't with my doctoral mentors. There were some that came after. So I was the only continuing factor in there. So I think it looked a little more believable. I came to Lessons for Success, which was amazing. Everyone says that, so you believe it. My R3 was not funded. It had what I thought was an embarrassingly terrible score. It was a 44. And I know now what Bob Hillman told me at the time was, oh yeah, 44. That means don't stop trying. Great. A 44 is what, a D? Like if you take the whole scale, it was humiliating. One of the things that I realized, having failed at my RO3 and having it reviewed here, which I think you guys are reviewing my grant again, just more room for embarrassment. I sat there and I listened to people really rip my RO3, even worse than the real reviewers had, which is when I realized nobody outside of my collaborators read this. It wasn't that I didn't try. I tried. I sent it to people. It's not their job to read your grant, right? You have to beg, borrow, and steal to get someone to put their eyes on these things. They're long. The margins are half an inch. Like, no one wants to read this. And so I came back from Lessons for Success, and I was really depressed. I'm bad at this. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have a mentor now, not a, supervisor. I wasted all those years of training not having supervisors read my work because I didn't know I was supposed to be writing grants, and now I am in trouble. So I went to my dean at the time, and I told her, you have to hire someone to read my grants. I actually had this conversation, and she's like, who? She's an interesting woman. She's at least entertaining this. And I had identified someone. He was a research professor at BU. He had, oh my gosh, I don't know. His webpage says something like 30 million in grants over his career. He's been writing to fund himself his whole life. And they were at a little low point, and he needed some effort covered. And so she hired him to mentor all the junior faculty in our college. And he reads our grants. It's awesome. So that was really helpful. I picked up my first PhD student, which was fantastic. I put in so many small grant submissions. I was writing grants pretty much 70% of the time, and I got some of them, and I failed at many of them. And I hired a lab manager, which, if you have the funds to do so, is a really marvelous idea. If you do experimental work, I'm the one managing the Google Calendar and scheduling subjects while I write all those grants. It was horrible. And I didn't even realize how, quote-unquote, inexpensive it can be to get someone to help you with those things. So, Interlude, year one, I looked this up. I submitted 13 grants in my first year. And I didn't get very many of those. And 13 was hard. And so I got some advice from Frank Gunther, who's in my department, because I'm a pessimistic person. He's like, you have to celebrate every step of grants. You should celebrate when you turn one in, because that's a good job. And you should celebrate when it gets reviewed, even if it doesn't get reviewed. And you should celebrate when you think you might get it, because by the time you get it, it's really not interesting anymore. And the side note to this is that given where the funding rates are, every time you don't get a grant, then you're just 10% closer to success. And I do realize that statistics don't work that way, but if you think about it, it works that way, definitely. So every time you fail, you have to go have a drink. All right, so then in year two, I had a lot of failures. In that fall, I submitted 3 grants, all on the same project. It was an aging project, aging and physiology of neck motor control, scintillating. I sent it to the American Federation for Aging Research, and they don't give you reviews either, so it's hard to tell how much they hated it. They just didn't fund it. And in the meantime, I had been talking, so this is sort of related to swallowing, theoretically, and Lana said it wasn't appropriate for NIDCD. And so I found someone at Aging to talk to who thought it would be very interesting. And I told her about my idea. I was going to submit an R21, and she's like, yeah, have you thought about our KO1? Which I hadn't, because I'm not eligible for any of the Ks in NIDCD, and I had them sort of out of my brain. And she's like, you should really think about it. And we talk about it. She's like, yeah, it'd be great. I'm like, okay, so I should submit a K this fall instead of an R21. And she's like, no, you can submit both. I'm like, oh, so change the aims. She's like, no, you can submit the same aims. It's okay. To the R21 and to the K. And then I checked it out, and I knew someone who had done this before, a year before. So I did. I wrote 2 grants for the same deadline. They were pretty similar, so it shouldn't count as 2, 1.5. And that was the worst fail of all, because actually the R21 was not even funded, definitely not funded, was not even scored. And right after they didn't score it, they sent me a note yelling at me about how it was illegal to send in both of them, even though the program director had told me to. So don't do that. Apparently it used to be okay. Actually, it might be okay again, because you could have multiple submissions now. I'll have to think about that. Anyway, at the time, it was definitely, that was a bad fall, actually. And then in the spring, I failed it in NSF. I tried a different R21 on a different project. That also failed. But my R03 got funded. Yay! That R03 got funded partially because of the amazing eyes that I had on it at Lessons for Success. And I guess since they didn't read any of those other failures, it's not your fault. I got a small, well, it's not that small, local grant through the Noonan Foundation funded for some of my other work, failed at ASHA Foundation. And then I failed at an NSF career grant and added my first postdoc. The reason I want to tell you about all the different times I've failed is because I'm used to it, but you might not be. I think there are a lot of type A personalities in communication disorders, a lot of people who've gotten a lot of A's, and I've gotten a lot of not A's, and so I'm really used to failing. So I would encourage you to not take failure as a personality trait, but as something that has to happen many times. All right, so then in the fall, I had a nice talk with Roger Miller at NIDCD, and he said, stop writing grants. I don't want to see any more R21s from you ever. So I know, actually, people don't believe he said it, but he did. So now my focus is enjoying my R03 and my foundation money. I'm going to keep trying with NSF because I got some really positive feedback, just not funded feedback, and to start prepping an R01 to submit in the next year and a half, I hope. I added 2 new PhD students, which brings me to 3, which is a large but optimal number, in my opinion. And this spring, I've resubmitted one of my NSFs. I'm prepping my career award resubmit. I added postdoc number 2, and I'm still prepping that R01. And now that's right now. I'm here talking to you. So, as I mentioned, I don't have any answers, actually. But I'm just letting you know where I'm coming from and the things that I'm trying in case you want to try them too. And now I have some tips, because they gave me a soapbox. Listen to yourself, but listen to others. Everyone kept telling me not to do this neck motor control thing, and I didn't listen to any of them. And by everybody, I mean at least 6 or 7 people that I respect a lot. When that many people tell you it's a dumb idea, you should just stop, actually. You're not always right. I was wrong, and I wasted a lot of time and effort on that. Go deep, but stay broad. People tell me I lack focus. And to some degree, they're correct. But on the other hand, I think having multiple lines of projects is smart because there are different agencies. Because just because you think it's an awesome idea, you could be wrong. Or even if you're right, someone else might not believe you. So I think it helps to have multiple things going on as long as they're complementary. And you should tell everyone what you're doing because you never know what skills or contexts that they might have that could help you. Grant writing, early and often. Share, and one way that I found doesn't really work with senior faculty, but with other junior faculty, volunteer to read their stuff. And then later, when you ask them, they'll know they owe you. Sit on a panel as soon as possible. So I've been moderately successful with this. For NIH, no success. I submitted, if you haven't done it already, send your CV immediately to be an early career reviewer for NIH. And I know they do ask some people, not me. What I have been successful with is getting on NSF panels, which has been amazing. I wish so much I could have done that before I bothered to send the first grant because it's like making sausage. It's amazing just to see, what they're really looking for and have the practice in reading the grants. So I've done that a couple of times and feel a lot more comfortable. And NSF is really open to having new people go. I volunteered there, and a year went by and nothing happened. And then another semi-junior, maybe 5th or 6th year assistant professor who I'm friends with had mentioned, oh, they ask me all the time. It's so annoying. I can't go again. And I'm like, oh, just send them my name. And she did, and they called me like a week later. So if you know anybody who reviews for NSF, just have them send your name in. I think that might work better. Don't take it personally when people don't talk to you, like program directors. They don't always want to talk to you, and it's not personal. And if you keep trying, eventually you'll find the right niche and find someone who can give you the good information. And make your work accessible. I heard this a few different times. I don't think it's so relevant for NIH, but for NSF, having an up-to-date website matters. Having your papers accessible on your website matters. I heard this from people who are NSF funded, but then when I was on panels, literally, as people review, there'll be a discussion about whether something is really true or whether whatever, and they go on the website and they look. They take a lot of time while they're reviewing these things, and they'll look up and see what you have on your website. So make sure it matches what you wrote in the grant. All right, time management. This is really random, but it really works for me. I waste an entire wall of my office with this whiteboard. This is a random shot of my urgent yes, urgent no, important yes, important no, and it helps me figure out what I'm allowed to do that day. And helps me not to do the urgent, not important at all things, at least to put them off for a little longer. And outsourcing. Obviously, I mentioned I'm actively trying to get grad students, postdocs, so it's clear that I think that's an important step, not just because the education is important, but because teaching them once really does save you in the long run if you get good students. All right, getting what you need. Ask for it. I asked for someone to be hired 20%, and she actually did it. And then 6 months later, I asked for endoscopy equipment that wasn't included in my startup. And I said, the college needs it for this reason and this reason, and she bought it. If you have a good reason, and you don't ask when you, like, be strategic, you know. I didn't wait a week in between the two big things that I asked for. And explain why, and have a solution. So don't just go and complain. You know, I didn't just go complain and say, ugh, no one will read my grants, it's so annoying. I said, no one will read my grants. Hire this guy to read my grants. And if you give them a to-do and they have the ability to do it, they want you to succeed, and it might work. All right, getting the most out of Lessons for Success, which is actually the topic I was asked to speak about. Catch up on sleep later. When I was here, you know, you have to be down in the lobby at 7:30, right? And then they're going to keep you busy all day. There will not be 3 minutes break, maybe bathroom. And then you're going to have dinner. And you're going to want to network and do all these things. And in the back of your mind, you're like, oh, well, at least you assistant professors. You're like, I have to grade this, and I need to go back. And you've got like 50 new emails that you're supposed. Just do that later tonight, way later. Like, really don't think about it and don't try to multitask, or you won't get enough out of the experience. I would write, that's the other thing. Or don't answer your emails and go back and work on your aims more, because after you talk to your mentor, you're going to want to do as much as you can while you're here with them. And I had a great mentor, Joanne Robbins, my year, and she actually passed back drafts with me over the next year. When I saw her at conferences, she would introduce me to people. So even though this isn't technically longer than this visit, many of the mentors will be great contacts for you later, and someone else who might at least look at a specific aims page, not guaranteeing it. And just keep in mind the amazing resource that you have just from having everybody's drafts of things and all of the PowerPoints. I go back to them all the time. I think that's it. Oh, one last thing. Inspired by Will, who is a doctoral student at BU, who asked me 6 months ago why he should have to do a postdoc. Here's why I think you should do a postdoc. Because you get more mentors and more sponsors that you can send your aims to later, who might feel some reason to read them for you. You can obtain a brand new network, especially if you move out of the same institution or city. You get to practice starting from scratch with a lot less pressure than a tenure track job. You know, when you start a new job, it's not just starting that new job, it's starting everything new about it. Where's the copier? How do I do the most mundane things that were easy in my last job? And so practicing that, it's a skill, and you'll be better at it when you start your tenure track job. Practice with research mentoring. So in my case, having all those undergrads to mentor was really helpful. Getting pilot data and grant writing experience. I sort of failed on that one, but you don't have to. And building your CV so you could get a better tenure track job, so that you have all those publications and you can compete with other people who didn't do a postdoc, and to distinguish yourself from your PhD supervisor. And for me, I think that's the big one. If you go right out, then you're just, no offense, a more junior version of your PhD mentor. And do you want to be writing grants that get reviewed in the same cycle as them? So you need some other skill to add to that to make you the next best thing.